You've just heard the sound of 4,000 rounds per minute tearing through a ground target. This was the exact moment when Mexican Navy officers gunned down one of the country's most wanted criminals, Juan Francisco Beltrán Sanchez, aka LH2. Leading the Beltrán Leyva organization, this drug lord forged alliances with police and politicians to carry out some of the most brutal attacks on record. Both uniformed personnel and civilians were susceptible to his wrath. In this new episode of Military Might, we will tell you how the beast was captured and the mysteries surrounding his death. Let's start with this shocking video. To understand the significance of Juan Francisco Beltrán Sanchez's capture, it is essential to delve into the history of one of the most dangerous criminal groups that emerged in Mexico. The 1990s are remembered as the era when the Sinaloa cartel established itself as one of the most powerful criminal forces on the planet. But El Chapo Guzman was not alone. At the same time, other factions emerged, one of which was led by his cousins, the Beltrán Leyva brothers, Arturo, Carlos, Alfredo José, Mario Alberto, and Héctor, formed a notorious group responsible for the wholesale transportation and sale of cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. From this position, they controlled numerous drug routes and were involved in human trafficking, money laundering, extortion, kidnapping, murder, and arms trafficking. The Beltrán Leyvas were one of the most dominant cartels in the country and even managed to infiltrate various government agencies and Interpol in Mexico. The state did not take long to respond. It was necessary to dismantle this criminal group to halt the escalation of violence in the nation. Shootouts like the one we just saw were an everyday occurrence. Even so, the drug trade thrived. The problem was that with the money came increased conflicts. Due to some mysterious arrests, the Beltrán Leyva clan suspected that El Chapo had betrayed them to the authorities. This sparked a war that drenched the country in blood and put the entire drug ecosystem in crisis. It was an open-air massacre in which nearly all the major leaders in the business were either killed or captured. In this chaotic context, the figure of Juan Francisco Beltrán Sanchez, aka LH2, emerged, a young and violent gunman who rose through the ranks at a dizzying pace. In a short time, he became the main leader of the cartel founded by the brothers, seizing his moment to stand out as a mastermind of drug trafficking. LH2's hitmen were among the most bloodthirsty in the country. They had the advantage of inheriting part of the arsenal and operational knowledge of the Beltrán Leyva organization, so they were not mere novices. They were seasoned soldiers well trained for combat. They showed no hesitation when it came to massacring civilians or sending grisly messages to their rivals, using body parts of fallen enemies. As his men took over new territories across Mexico, Juan Francisco Beltrán Sanchez chose the state of Nayarit, in the west of the country, as his operational bunker. The criminal maintained a low profile. He disliked being the center of attention or displaying his power to local authorities. It seems unbelievable, but many of the capo's neighbors were completely unaware of his business. They found out what kind of person lived among them the night that armed Mexican Navy helicopters flew over the neighborhoods to gun down the criminal. Let's hear the words of one of the local residents.
Pero aquí nunca me imaginé que esto fuera a suceder, y más sabiendo pues que está el fiscal aquí cortito. La verdad no creí que algo así fuera a pasar.
¿Pero aquí vive el fiscal?
Tengo entendido que tiene casa aquí, dentro del fraccionamiento.
You might wonder how he managed to go unnoticed despite the scale of his operations. According to official information, Juan Francisco Patron Sanchez's group received government protection from the former governor of Nayarit, Roberto Sandoval, who has been requested by the United States for extradition to face charges for collaborating with criminal groups. Additionally, he was linked to former prosecutor Edgar Vadia, who surrendered to U.S. authorities and was sentenced in September 2019 to 20 years in prison for being found guilty of conspiring to distribute cocaine, marijuana, and methamphetamines in exchange for bribes from criminal organizations. This will not be the last time you hear the Vadia surname, as it proved crucial in unraveling some of the biggest mysteries surrounding this case. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. LH2 was linked to the attack on a military convoy that occurred on September 30th, 2016, in Culiacan, Sinaloa. The attack took place when a group of federal officers was escorting a Red Cross ambulance transporting a member of the Beltrán Leyva organization, Julio Oscar Ortiz Vega, who had been wounded in a clash in the municipality of Badiraguato.
En el lugar quedaron 2 unidades militares, miren nada más, completamente calcinadas.
In the attack, 5 soldiers were killed and 10 were injured. It was a brutal and sudden ambush in which LH2's hitmen employed all their firepower. According to the investigation, a judicial police officer arrived at the scene 13 minutes after shots were reported to the Sinaloa Emergency and Immediate Response Center. Subsequently, state and judicial police responded to the call and encountered the bloody scene. Several dead officers covered in shell casings and blood. It was a savage crime that highlighted the urgent need to stop LH2's activities. Since then, capturing the capo became an absolute priority for the authorities. LH2's career came to an end on Thursday, February 9, 2017, in Tepic, Nayarit. It all began around 7 p.m., with the arrival of 5 armed Mexican Navy vehicles, which were supported by foot soldiers from other local forces. The first reports of violence came from neighbors who reported a shootout in the Linda Vista and Fraccionamiento Arbaledas neighborhoods of the Nayarit capital. At that moment, they were advised to stay inside their homes to avoid being hit by stray bullets. This was not a mere gang conflict. These confrontations were part of the operation to finally take down LH2 and his close associates. If you've ever dreamed of being part of a drug enforcement mission, today is your lucky day. Next, we'll see shocking footage filmed during the beginning of that operation.
¡Arriba!
With assault rifles and equipped for combat, the Navy operators advanced on a property identified as the criminals' hideout. Confused, the offenders fired and threw fragmentation grenades at the military personnel conducting the operation from both land and air. Fortunately, the law enforcement agents had several advantages: surprise, superior firepower, and knowledge of the house where their target was located. The uniformed personnel did not act blindly. For months, they had been collaborating with other local and international institutions to corner LH2. Since the massacre of police officers in 2016, the capo had become a priority target, and all efforts were focused on his capture. The breakthrough came when a corrupt official was coerced into aiding the ruse that led the criminal to the identified residence. We will provide details about this mysterious figure later, but for now, let's return to the officer's perspective to experience firsthand the moment they resorted to using explosives. Representatives from the armed forces indicated that LH-2 was killed by gunfire from sailors aboard a Black Hawk helicopter equipped with a .50 caliber machine gun. The minigun unleashed its fury on the residents, demonstrating the destructive power of its more than 4,000 rounds per minute. We're referring to the brutal burst we saw at the beginning of the video, one of the most iconic images of the war on drugs. Federal government officials noted that, in addition to Juan Francisco Patron Sanchez, 7 gunmen were killed in the confrontation that occurred in the Linda Vista neighborhood. All were from the state of Sinaloa, as revealed through interviews with their families. The most notable aspect of the operation was that they managed to eliminate all targets without causing any civilian casualties, which is remarkable given the level of weaponry used and the number of military personnel involved. Let's hear the testimony of a neighbor who was at the scene when the operation began.
Yo que estaba en mi negocio cuando Secretaría de Marina como a las 6:30 de la tarde nos avisó que cerráramos el negocio porque iba a haber un operativo. Pues yo pienso que como unos 30 o 40 minutos, duró mucho tiempo.
During the time frame mentioned by the businessman, the military managed to infiltrate, neutralize, and eliminate the threats associated with the Beltrán Leyva cartel. Sources from the Nayarit Attorney General's office confirmed that a large arsenal, including high-powered weapons and luxury vehicles, was confiscated from the alleged criminals. The following day, the operation continued. On February 10, 2017, law enforcement officers killed Daniel Isaac Silva Garate, aka H9, in the town of El Aguacate, Tepic. He was identified as LH2's successor. At that time, an official spokesperson added that, during activities on the roads leading to the community of Camachín de Jauja, the bodies of 3 other men were found. The deceased were young messengers for the Beltrán Leyvas, who had likely been executed by the criminal group to prevent them from testifying against them if they were caught. Many of the most incredible details about LH2's death are known thanks to the testimony of Edgar Veitia, the former Attorney General of Nayarit mentioned earlier, who had received bribes from the Beltrán Leyva capo for over 3 years. This way, he earned their trust and gathered enough information to deliver them to the authorities on a silver platter on February 9, 2017. According to Veitia, he was the one who tricked LH2 into going to a house where they had agreed to meet privately. As you might expect, it was all an ambush. The house was already prepared with 5 naval officers, with a commander stationed on the 2nd floor. The former prosecutor recounted that the sailors positioned 2 trucks and an armored vehicle near where the capo's bodyguards were, who then began firing and throwing grenades. So, the Navy sent armed helicopters to reinforce the operation. These machines were the key to resolving all the issues faced by the officers. Within seconds, the hail of bullets overwhelmed the resistance of the drug traffickers. The 3-story house where Juan Francisco Patron Sanchez was hiding was destroyed, with the front riddled with bullet holes, providing a measure of the brutality that took place that night. Once they managed to gain control of the situation, the Navy personnel placed a weapon in LH2's hand and ordered him to run so they could execute him. However, LH2 allegedly shouted, "I'm with Cienfuegos," referring to the then Secretary of National Defense, Salvador Cienfuegos. This highlighted the close relationship between organized crime and high levels of Mexican politics, clearly demonstrating that without collaboration between these two worlds, the existence and success of drug trafficking would be impossible. Currently, Cienfuegos is imprisoned in the United States, as these connections were proven and judged accordingly. The text messages and the relationship between the Secretary of Defense and LH2 were undeniable. Many of the operations carried out by the Beltrán Leyva cartel were conducted with the agreement and collaboration of the public official. Let's return to the night Juan Francisco Patron Sanchez was captured, based on the words of a neighbor who was present during the shootout.
Muchos balazos, demasiados.
¿Hubieron momentos de miedo, señor?
No, sí da miedo, ¿no? Más como media hora tirando balazos, se prolongó mucho la balacera.
The capture of the capo involves several unresolved mysteries, the main one being related to how the protagonist of this story died. According to official documents, he was killed by gunfire coming from the Navy helicopters. However, another version emerged during the investigation. Edgar Vadia provided details. When they entered the house where the meeting was taking place, LH2 was detained by the sailors who took him to the second floor. I stayed on the first floor and heard the sailors interrogating and torturing LH2. I also heard LH2 crying. Captain Tigrillo was the highest-ranking officer present during the torture. According to the prosecutor's testimony, the sailors interrogated LH2 for between 45 minutes and an hour, trying to learn in detail about his connections and who else was involved in the business. After the beating, the criminal was still alive as he had not been shot in critical areas. In fact, Vadia saw him leave the house bleeding but walking normally. He didn't seem to be dying or suffering from fatal wounds. The Navy personnel loaded LH2 into a truck and took him to a safe house where his bodyguards were. Vadia believes the officers moved him there to carry out an arbitrary execution. Regardless of how the events unfolded that February night in 2017, the death of this drug leader represented a significant victory for Mexican justice. The following images show the transfer of the criminal's remains. You might notice the large number of uniformed personnel escorting the body, but in these cases there is always a risk that the deceased's associates might try to recover their leader's body. In that mission, not only was one of the country's main instigators of violence taken down, but the political and military connections that allowed him to operate were also exposed. This led to the removal of corrupt elements, such as Secretary of Defense Salvador Cienfuegos. It opened the door to investigate cases related to the capo that had been unresolved by the justice system. Although after LH2's death, the Beltrán Leyva cartel tried to replace him with the rise of other figures, the organization never returned to its former state. Operational capabilities steadily declined as their hitmen were either arrested or even hired by rival factions. Such is the drug trade. One day you're the undisputed king, and the next you're a pariah with a price on your head. This was precisely the story of Juan Francisco Patron Sanchez, aka LH2. With that, we come to the end of the video. If you enjoy these types of features where we delve into the biographies of the most dangerous drug lords on the planet, we invite you to subscribe and activate notifications. This way, you'll stay updated on all our latest content. Without further ado, we'll see you in the next episode of Military Might. Thank you for joining us.